Hello, once again. We are going to look at another exciting game. This game is from European Championship in 2009 with the white pieces. We have Mamedyarov, a dangerous attacking player who primarily opens with D4. And I've always been a fan of players who attack using D4 because most of the time a lot of attacking players, um, gain a reputation attacking with E4. So there's a few players that play D4 primarily, Queen's Gambit, but are great attacking players. Mamedyarov is one. Of course, Kasparov, but he would switch from E4 and D4. Um, who else? Of course, Alyekin, modern player Sokolov, just to name a few. With the black pieces is none other than the Ginger GM himself, Simon Williams. And I like this game because both players are aggressive minded players, and this game just had a lot of excitement, and I wanted to share it with you today. So Mamedyarov started out with D4, of course, Knight of 6 from Simon Williams. Um, those of you who are Simon Williams fans know that he loves the King's Indian, and this is what we have on the board here. So after D6, Mamedyarov played Bishop E2, delaying the situation of the G1 knight because he wants to play the Averbach variation, which tends to restrict black's aggressive possibilities somewhat, especially the move E5 can't really be played in this position. So knight BD7, H6, and C5 are other moves. C5 is like the main line here. But knight BD7 is also playable. Queen D2 and C5. Okay, D5 is played, and now here Williams chose to play in Benko style, which is a common theme in this opening. And you have the uh, Benoni type pawn structure here with the pawn on C5. You can play either like a Benoni or a Benko and sacrifice on B5 as Simon Williams did. So B5, C takes B5, and A6. Knight F3 by Mamedyarov. Queen to A5. Castle. A takes B5. And now Bishop B5. Now, not to get too deep into analysis, but it's known that black has some compensation for the pawn, mainly in his pristine pawn structure. He has this dangerous pawn on C5 that's waiting for the right time, usually late in the endgame, to advance to become a queen on C1. And he has easy piece development, right? It's easy to develop all his pieces. His rooks along with his queen usually migrate to the A and B files. The knights hang around where they're at right now. Sometimes they jump to G4, E5, B6, and the bishop sometimes will trade itself off, the light squared bishop. And all these pieces congregating on the A and B files put tremendous pressure on white's pawns, and it's usually it can be quite difficult, especially if the white player doesn't know his way around the Benko to hold on to his pawn. Right, many games end up with white giving back the pawn and settling for a draw, and even sometimes losing in the end game. However, enough water is it's flowed under the bridge in the Benko variation where white has adequate ways to play against it and secure an advantage. And many times white just holds that pawn into the end game, and then black just loses a pawn down. That's one of the things I don't like against about the Benko is that black gives up the pawn, but then it's like he struggles the whole game just to get a draw, which is interesting. But to each his own. But anyway, this game is not a Benko technically. It's a Averbach King's Indian, but the style of play is similar. All right. So bishop a6, as I said, Williams wants to exchange off bishops. So bishop takes a6, rook takes a6, rook fe1, and now knight g4. This is a common theme here where the knights want to leap into e5 square. Here it may be a bit premature because the e7 pawn is hanging, but Simon Williams is an aggressive player and he foresees some activity here. This is why in many, again using the Benko example, in many Benkos you'll see this move h3 played early to prevent this maneuver. But however, we kind of transpose into a Benko type position, and that move is not able to be prevented at this time. And also, again, it's very difficult to get rid of this bishop. As you can see, the pawn can just be captured. And black has to be active because he is, after all, down a pawn. His position, again, is beautiful. The pieces are easy, well placed. But he is down a pawn, and he has to do something about that. Because white's pieces are well placed also. It's not like white's pieces are bad. But instead of knight g4 here, um, maybe just rook b8, continuing in Benko fashion. And then play can go, for example, rook ab1, rook ab6, because this is what the Benko is about, putting pressure on these pawns and pieces here, defending. h3, again preventing this idea. Now h6, right, sacrificing the h pawn. And the idea is if bishop takes, again this is my own analysis, if bishop takes, then the queen is drawn up here, and then rook takes b2 can be played. Okay, and I think black is okay in that position. So that's just one example why I like rook b8 a little better. However, knight g4 was chosen in the game, more dynamic continuation, because Simon's idea is after bishop takes e7 is rook e8, and then we have this activity and pressure down the e file here, and again the pieces start getting active for black. But again, the pawn is a pawn. So bishop g5 is played. And here, Simon plays rook b6. Rook ac1, just solid play from Mamedyarov. And now c4 is played. And the idea with c4 is Simon, if he could move again, right, he would like to just jump into e5 here. And you can see with the activity of black's pieces, it's very hard for white to make anything out of having an extra pawn. So for example, I did give white an extra move here, black an extra move. So after c4, say white wants to do, black would like to play knight d e5 and say knight takes. It could be the other knight too, it doesn't matter. Knight ends up on e5. Let's say b3, because this is definitely an issue. So b3, c takes b3, a takes b3, rook takes b3, and black is okay here. Again, this is just a sample line, and just attacking that knight again, and the game could end in a perpetual there. All right. So oftentimes these games come down to, one or two tempi. So that's the idea behind c4. Okay. Excuse me. So it's Mamedyarov's turn, and he recognizes this. Of course, he sees the idea behind c4, and him being a dynamic player himself, he plays the immediate e5. And you might say, well, he's just giving up the pawn. The knight is still coming to e5. Well, there's a big difference. Remember, let me just show you real quick. Remember in the variation that I gave you where I gave Simon an extra move, the knight comes to e5, and this pawn is still here on e4. So it's blocking this rook here on e1. Now let's go back to the game. After Mamedyarov plays e5, and sacrifices the pawn, that pawn that was on e4 is now gone. It's been sacrificed. So now let's look. Knight takes e5, and of course Simon would love to play knight takes e5, but the problem is that this is no longer an issue because of the rook on e8 that's unprotected. Can you see that? If knight d3, then rook would simply take e8. So after knight takes e5, f4 could happen, and the knight really can't move. Again, if knight d3, then just simply rook takes e8 with check, winning. So after a move like f4, h6 would have to be played, and then all the tactics just simply end up in white's favor. And we see black's position is pretty busted. He's just down the material. This is why after knight g takes e5, knight takes e5, Simon took with the pawn. D takes e5. And now white has a dangerous pawn here on the d file. So bishop e3. Mamedyarov just attacks this rook right here. And now rook b7. And I want you to look at black's pieces. Although they're developed, basically they're uncoordinated. And this is going to be a major issue for the rest of the game for the Ginger GM. Notice the queen on a5 is unprotected. Rook b7 is unprotected. Knight on d7 is only protected by the rook on b7, and the rook on e8 is unprotected. And they're all kind of doing their own thing, basically. Right? They're not working together. And this bishop is blocked on this diagonal, which is something you don't want to have usually in a banco. You don't want to have this blocked. So it's kind of like the position for black is taking on a bizarro version of a like banco gambit and king's Indian, is where some features are from the banco and some are from the king's Indian, but it's like in a bad way. All right, because black's pieces are all over the place. Let's continue, and you'll see what I'm talking about when about the features of the king's Indian showing up. So rook ed1, just overprotecting this pawn and preparing tactics against this unprotected queen. Notice the queen is unprotected here. And notice also, in contrast, the harmony of the white pieces. All right, just looking at them, the aesthetic aspect is enough. Even if you didn't know anything about chess, they just look right. If you've seen enough chess positions, you know what good coordination looks like. Okay, black's pieces kind of look randomly placed. So rook ed1. And now Simon Williams plays f5. And this is what I was talking about. Now he's playing it like a king's Indian. So the banco idea is going on over on the queen side. And on the king side, you had this attacking scheme with f5, f4. And of course, he has to do something because he's down material. And, you just can't sit by and watch your position grow worse and worse. And besides, he has the threat of f4. This is why Mamedyarov moves out the way. He plays queen e2. Now rook c8, protecting this pawn. Notice too, amateur chess players, beginning chess players, is that when you have to make a defensive move, such in this case, this threat of f4, try to make a move that defends but also attacks your opponent. In this case, you have queen e2. It defends the bishop, so if in case of say f4 or something like that, the bishop can get out of the way. And at the same time, you're attacking the pawn. So it forces him to take account of what you're trying to do also. So it's just not a one-sided situation where the opponents just push you around. So rook c8. And now Mamedyarov plays d6. So he just pushes the pawn. This is dangerous for for black, as new avenues are open up. Possibilities to use the d5 square for the pieces now. So f4. And here, again, the same principle applies. I just told you a few seconds ago that when you have to make some type of defensive move, look for a move that will offend your opponent. So when you have to play defense, look for a move that will offend. Right? That didn't come off too good. I was trying to make some kind of rhyme, but it didn't work out. But when you're, looking, for a defensive move, try to find a move to attack. All right, that solves both problems. In this case, the bishop is attacked, right? So we can just move bishop d2 here, which again would be fine. White has a big enough advantage where it will work out. Okay, but it's not the strongest move. For instance, bishop takes d2 could be met by rook takes b2. And then you have this pin in opposition on the queen here. Then best will probably be queen g4, where you can make another attacking move. That's what I was saying about the uncoordinated nature of the black pieces. They're scattered around too much, and it's easy to gain the initiative from them. But here Mamedyarov found a very strong move. Instead of just putting the bishop back, he played bishop d2. Excuse me, not bishop d2, I just said that. He played knight to d5. The idea is now if f takes e3, then simply knight e7. Again, the uncoordinated nature of the pieces allows this rook to be in this situation where it's just hanging. So it wouldn't even be where black is gaining, bishop knight for rook. It's just basically bishop for rook and pawn at best. Okay, so king h8 for example, and knight takes c8, and then e takes f2. And of course, white is clearly in the driver's seat after either queen takes f2 or king f1 for that matter. So, so after knight d5, king h8. Now again, does he move the bishop? Remember, look for an aggressive move. Look for an attacking move before you decide I'm going to make this defensive move. Because if you make a defensive move here, say bishop d2, then what's up with this knight? See, if you have to play bishop d2 now, that means this idea with knight d5 is totally refuted. Because after queen d5, white will be losing here. So what this means is that Mamedyarov, after f4, he had to see that he had something after knight d5 and king h8. So he saw farther than that. So let's go. Knight d5, king h8. And Mamedyarov played a powerful move at this point. Very strong move. I'm not sure if Simon may have overlooked it. And again, if he had to bail out, he still has to move knight e7. Because remember, the the knight didn't move to e7 yet. The king just moved, anticipating the check. But here, He plays a very strong move, b4. I hope some of you saw that move. Again, I've been hinting at it for a few minutes now. Again, the uncoordinated nature of the black pieces. This is a major theme in this game because this allows us move b4. Of course, black would love to take en passant, but the rook on c8 is unprotected, so he can't take. This forces the queen to have to do something um, that it doesn't want to do. Black wants to attack here, but he can't because his hands are preoccupied with the threats that's being made by white. Simon Williams played queen a4 here. Now, if he tries to, improve his coordination here with a move like queen d8, right, protecting the rook, then there's two good moves here. Bishop d2 can be played now, right? No problem. Or knight e7. Knight e7 is a possibility. But then after f takes e3, let's see, f takes e3, knight takes c8, and queen c8. Queen c4, white is still in the driver's seat. But the way I see it is why even give up the bishop if you don't have to? So instead of playing that line with knight e7, just bishop d2, and play can go rook c6, for instance, b5, and this shows how strong your position is. You're not even worried about this pawn here. If rook takes d6, then bishop b4 is killer. Okay, and then the rook really has nowhere to go, save e6, but then queen takes c4, and now again with the theme of just picking on these uncoordinated pieces, there's all types of threats in the atmosphere here. Okay, with this queen here and this rook on d1, this guy hanging. So suffice it to say that white is just clearly winning at that point. So b4, queen a4 from the fighter Simon Williams. Mamedyarov just put the bishop there at c5. He's daring white to take on c5 because after knight takes c5, which happened in the game, just simply rook takes c4, which is brutal because again the pin, so this knight cannot move, right? And you're threatening to take here. Again, look at the pieces and remember the uncoordinated nature. And basically the lesson to learn is don't let your pieces don't let your pieces get out of harmony, right? Always strive for harmony and cooperation with the pieces. Rook takes c4, queen a6. Now this is interesting because it's like Williams is trying to reverse the situation here. Notice now that this rook is pinned to the queen, right? Now the rook can't move really. Well, actually the rook can go here, but in this particular position you see the queen can be in some danger. Like for instance, if rook takes c, let's blunder. Why not? For instance, if rook takes c5, for instance, would be met by queen takes e2. Okay, so now Mamedyarov is faced with the situation here, right? But again, approaching these type of positions, once you understand the idea, is okay. He's just wanting to stop me from playing rook takes c5, and I'll show you this idea too, because it's important that you see the ideas. So it's already obvious what happens on rook takes c5, right? Queen takes e2, and black is okay. The other idea is if what happens if b takes c5. Well, if b takes c5, then rook takes c5 with the same thing, exploiting the pin, You can't take, right? Because queen e2. So this is Simon's last ditch effort with queen a6. So I didn't want you to think queen a6 had no meaning, that he was, it shows you what type of fighter he is. And these grandmasters in general, is you have to take the win from these guys. If you're gonna beat them, you gotta take the win. All right, they're not just gonna lay down even to the end. So right up to the very end, he's still presenting a problem. But all you got to do here is just see what's going on. Okay, there's a pin here. How can I solve this problem? Again, how can I play defense but attack at the same time? All right, and this is what Mamedyarov did. So now we know what the problem is. Okay, the queen is unprotected, right? And then right then and there, you think of ways where you can um, protect and also threaten at the same time. Okay. So one move, like for example, I'm not saying this is a move, but a move like say King F1, for example. Okay, right, is King F1 possible? You think that's a move that's possible. It does the job. Let's say let's say Rook D to E1. Of course, you won't be moving the pieces during the game, but these are moves that you have to consider if they're any good or not. All right. So in other words, we first describe the problem, what our opponent is trying to do, and then we see if we can ignore his threat and make one of our own. Here, Mamedyarov played the move, very powerful move, knight c3. Okay, knight c3 solves the problem and maintains the threat, and Simon Williams resigned here. Again, maintain the threat. What was the threat? The threat is to be able to capture this knight. Remember, the knight can't move because of the situation, right? The uncoordinated nature of the pieces. The rook here on c8 is totally vulnerable. All right. So you might say, and now of course the knight is protecting the queen. So you might say, well, what was wrong with the other two moves, King F1 and Rook E1? Well, there's a major difference. The major difference here is that the threat is reinstituted here. But for instance, after Rook E1, Black can simply play the move Queen D6, and you see how the knight is threatened here. Okay, so and then if say Rook takes, then it would just be simply Rook takes, Pawn takes, and then Queen takes. Okay, and then on King F1, right, the Queen is protected. And this move, Queen D6, is possible here also because the knight is still here. Now, Black is still, still kind of busted here. Okay, but he gets a little more counterplay. All right, he gets a little counterplay, but White is still in the driver's seat. So, for instance, Knight takes F4, introducing the discovery against the excuse me, against the Queen. And Black has some dynamic play. For instance, he would give up his queen there by just taking the rook. And then play would continue in this manner. G3. You gotta get the king out of there. Okay, and that's just a little bit, of analysis. I mean, I've looked at this game in good detail. I don't want to bore you with all of these lines, but that was what was wrong with King F1. But again, if you found King F1 and played that, like you still be in the driver's seat. But again, that means you understood, the tactics that were going on, what Queen A6 represented, and what Williams was trying to do here. Mamedyarov just played the move that basically left no room for any counterplay. Notice that Knight C3 protects the queen, right? So there's no more. The pin is invalid. With the queen on A6, Queen E2, that's invalidated, and the D6 pawn is protected. Notice that was a major theme in the other variations. Now the rook is just protecting the queen. The threat is still there, and that's, my friends, is an example of a perfect counter strike. Your opponent makes a threat, and then you just lay the hammer down. So I hope that game was very instructive to you. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm big fans of both players, and I want to thank them for presenting an exciting game, and I hope that I explained it to you thoroughly and that you understood it. So I'll see you guys on the next video.